They say Edward Mordrake begged doctors to kill him, not because of illness, not because of madness, but because of the thing that lived on the back of his skull. A second face, twisted, whispering, grinning, that never closed its eyes, never stopped murmuring in voices only he could hear. He claimed it spoke at night, when the world fell silent, filling his dreams with visions of hell no priest could cleanse. Some said it laughed when he cried. Some swore it moved its lips when Edward tried to pray. And yet, you have never been told the full truth. What if Mordrake's cursed visage wasn't just a deformity, but a symbol of knowledge, forbidden knowledge, stitched into flesh? Subscribe this channel to get dark, true history, which was buried and not heard so far before disappear it again. The newspapers of the late 1800s turned him into a carnival story, the grotesque curiosity of medical journals. But those accounts, the ones still passed around today, are fragments, distortions. What you were not supposed to know is that his condition was not unique, that there are missing files, erased testimonies, sealed cabinets in the archives of America's earliest psychiatric institutions that mention others like him. Edward was born into nobility, an English aristocrat of refinement, gifted with intelligence, music, and grace. But history forgets that his family had ties to American bloodlines, merchant dynasties with hidden eugenic practices, and experiments long before the name eugenics was ever printed. Mordrake was not an accident of nature. He was an echo of something more deliberate, more ancient. In his time, the medical establishment framed him as a spectacle. But his writings, which his family attempted to destroy, hint at truths they feared would unravel the image of progress and science itself. He wrote of the second consciousness, a parasitic shadow, in his skull that mocked his every move. He swore it belonged not to him, but to a lineage, a force that had been stitched into human bloodlines by hands that sought control, generation after generation. He believed he was not cursed, but chosen as a vessel, one designed to carry an experiment that had been unfolding in secrecy for centuries. And here is the darkest truth of all. The whispers Edward heard were not random madness. They were instructions, commands, ritual fragments from a language older than English, older than Latin, older even than Babylon. A tongue of domination, of manipulation. The kind still used in places of power, hidden in plain sight, to steer nations without the people ever realizing it. Edward Mordrake didn't simply suffer. He carried within him a secret that institutions, then and now, have worked tirelessly to bury. The official records say Edward was educated, refined, a man of talent who composed music of haunting beauty. But what's missing is the silence around his bloodline. The Mordrakes were tied by marriage to families who funded the earliest psychiatric hospitals in both England and America. Families who quietly financed research into abnormal births, not out of compassion, but out of obsession. They were looking for something. They believed certain deformities were not accidents, but gateways. The family kept their archives sealed, but in fragments that survived fires and purges, there are mentions of dual beings. Children born with mirrored skulls, voices without tongues, eyes that did not belong to them. Edward himself wrote of his brother face in passages his relatives tried to burn. He described it as not flesh, but vessel. He said at night its whispers grew sharp, repeating words he did not understand until he traced them against paper. Those words, later studied, matched fragments of Chaldean incantations, the kind used not for prayer, but for binding the will of men to unseen masters. How could a 19th century aristocrat have known these patterns unless they were etched into him from birth? Unless his body itself was a cipher? Doctors dismissed him as mad, but their reports betray a fear beneath the ink. One physician in Boston, yes, Boston, where Mordrake's family sent him for treatment, wrote privately that the second face smiled when Mordrake spoke of suicide. He noted that when Edward covered his ears to escape its voice, his pulse raced as if he were hearing something not of the air, but of the blood. That same doctor's notes disappeared after his sudden death in 1891. Cause of death: apoplexy. Convenient. What few realize is that Mordrake's case coincided with a wave of disappearances inside the very hospitals where he was examined. Patients without family ties, the poor, the unclaimed, the nameless, vanished from their beds. The institution recorded them as transferred. But no records exist of where they were sent. Some researchers suspect they became specimens, flesh experiments, attempts to recreate what Edward carried unwillingly. You were told he died in solitude, that he left behind only tragedy. But think, why would newspapers in both England and America print near-identical reports of his curse? Why amplify his story, only to mock him as a freak? Because sometimes ridicule is the perfect veil. Hide a truth inside spectacle, and the masses will never question. Edward Mordrake was never meant to be remembered as a man. He was meant to be remembered as a joke. But buried beneath that ridicule lies the shadow of a project that never ended. Edward Mordrake's torment was not confined to the whispers in his skull. It was magnified by the way institutions treated him, not as a patient, not even as a man, but as a specimen. Behind the polished walls of the hospitals that claimed to help him, his suffering was documented with a clinical detachment that strips away humanity. They measured his skull. They charted the twitch of every muscle on the parasitic face. They noted when the lips quivered, when the eyes seemed to glisten. But what they never admitted publicly was the one thing Edward told them in confidence. The face responded to power. When an authority figure entered the room, a physician, a clergyman, an aristocrat of higher station, Edward swore the face sneered or muttered in tones that seemed designed to mock obedience. He said it was as if the second consciousness recognized hierarchy and resented it. Some doctors laughed this off. Others recorded it carefully, then sealed their journals. Those journals disappeared into archives that were later accidentally destroyed in fires. Fires that seemed to sweep through asylums and record houses with remarkable precision, consuming only the most sensitive files. Edward begged for the face to be cut off. He told his doctors it spoke of death. Not his, but the deaths of others. Names of patients he had never met. Names that later appeared on the list of the missing. He warned that if they did not silence it, more would vanish. But no surgeon dared. Why? Because among the men who examined him, there were whispers of something else. That removing the second face might not kill it. That it might continue in some other form if separated from the body that carried it. And so they let him suffer, not from ignorance, but from fear. Fear that what was lodged in his skull was not an accident of biology, but a conduit, a bridge between flesh and force, is older than science. In this way, Mordrake became a prisoner of two systems at once, the biological curse within him and the institutional curse around him. Both used him, both fed off him. When he finally took his own life, it was not an escape. It was an act of defiance. The official story says he left a note demanding the evil face be destroyed before burial. But what you were never told is that the request was ignored. The body was claimed not by family, but by officials tied to the very institutions that had studied him. And the records of where he was buried vanished. Edward Mordrake's corpse did not disappear by chance. It was collected. Because whatever lived behind that second face was never meant to rest. When Edward Mordrake's body was discovered, the story should have ended there. A tragedy, a life consumed by a rare deformity and unbearable torment. That's what the newspapers printed. A brief obituary, stripped of the disturbing details he begged the world to know. But the truth is that Edward's death was not the conclusion. It was the beginning of a darker chapter. Because when the coroner arrived, he found instructions. Mordrake's note, frantic yet clear. "Do not let them bury me intact. Destroy the second face, or it will live beyond me." Those words were never honored. The surgeons who had long studied him convened in secret. Not to cremate, not to destroy, but to preserve. Specimens like Mordrake were rare. Too rare to be lost to the earth. His head, it is said, was removed and stored in fluid, under lock and key. And if this sounds like a grotesque rumor, understand this. London and Boston both possessed underground networks of medical men who collected what could never be displayed publicly. These were not sideshows for the carnival. These were vaults of the elite, cabinets of horrors kept for study, ritual, and control. The institution that claimed Mordrake's remains never disclosed them. No public autopsy records survive. No burial certificate can be traced. Instead, his name appeared in obscure medical catalogues, not listed openly, but hinted at in codes and numbers. In 1904, a reference surfaced to Specimen 412, bifacial subject, anomalous activity reported. That reference was quietly erased in later editions. The fire that supposedly destroyed those archives came only months later. Too convenient, too precise. What did they fear? Not the deformity itself. Such cases had been documented before. What they feared was the intelligence, the murmuring, the possibility that the parasitic face was not merely a growth, but a doorway. Edward's suicide may have silenced his suffering, but if the second face was indeed something more, something parasitic, conscious, or connected to forces unnamed, then its preservation was not scientific, it was ritualistic. Rumors persisted for decades. A crate shipped across the Atlantic, a jar marked only with initials, private collectors boasting of the whispering specimen at hidden gatherings. These accounts were always dismissed as superstition. Yet every time such a lead surfaced, the paper trail ended abruptly. Witnesses withdrew their statements. Records vanished overnight. Fires and floods seemed to strike archives with uncanny timing. Edward Mordrake's remains were not lost. They were hidden, absorbed into a web of institutions that dealt not in healing, but in secrecy. His body, and whatever lived within it, was taken. Not to honor his suffering, but to ensure that the truth of what he carried would never reach the public. And yet, even in silence, whispers persisted. Because some things cannot be buried, not in earth, not in archives, and not in history. The official story insisted that Edward Mordrake's remains were gone, his body interred without ceremony, but fragments of testimony, whispered across decades, tell a different story. From London's medical basements to hidden American collections, witnesses spoke of something unspeakable, not just a specimen in a jar, but a presence. They described entering rooms where silence itself felt heavier, where the fluid in the glass seemed to ripple without cause, and where the second face of Edward Mordrake was not still. It twitched, it grimaced. Some swore it even breathed. In 1921, a young assistant at a private medical archive in Boston confessed to seeing it. His diary, later discovered among his belongings, records one night when he was ordered to fetch specimen 412 from storage. He opened the cabinet, lifted the jar, and froze. "The second face was awake," he wrote. "The eyes did not blink, but they followed. The lips trembled as if words were forming, yet no sound came. And still, in my head, I heard laughter." The assistant resigned weeks later, refusing to ever speak of it again. His journal was hidden by his family for generations. Other rumors surfaced in medical circles. In 1937, at a clandestine gathering of anatomists in New York, a collector allegedly unveiled the preserved head to a select audience. One physician present described the atmosphere as oppressive, like a church in which something blasphemous was being worshipped. The second face, he said, contorted while submerged, not in random muscle spasms, but in expressions, grinning, scowling, mocking. The witnesses left shaken, many never speaking of the night again. Perhaps the most disturbing account came in the late 1950s, from a janitor at a private hospital rumored to house forbidden specimens. He swore that during his night rounds, he heard muffled whispers from behind a locked door. Badafiao. First, he dismissed it as his imagination. But the whispers persisted, low and venomous, sometimes breaking into high-pitched shrieks that no human throat could produce. When he finally confided in a nurse, she warned him to stop asking questions. Weeks later, he was dismissed, and soon after, disappeared altogether. If these stories are true, then Mordrake's warning was prophetic. The second face did not die with him. It lingered, suspended in chemical preservation, drawing breath not through lungs, but through something else, something we have no name for, and those who came too close to it were either silenced, discredited, or erased. The institutions that hid Mordrake's remains claimed science, but what they guarded was not for study. It was for containment, and even then, it may not have been enough. Edward Mordrake's cursed second face was not the only relic America tried to bury under the pretense of medical study. Once you trace the whispers, you find yourself staring into a pattern, one that stretches across the country, linking institutions, collectors, and shadow archives. His jarred head was merely the most infamous. Behind locked doors, there were others. In Philadelphia's medical basements, there are records of an infant born with 3 eyes, its skull preserved and kept from the public for moral reasons. In Chicago, whispers told of a withered torso, the body of a man who survived for decades with no lower half, his remains quietly purchased by a physician who trafficked in anomalies. New Orleans guarded a stillborn child with what they called the mouth of two, not merely a cleft palate, but 2 separate jaws fused into a single face, one still grinning long after death. The pattern is undeniable. Such specimens were never displayed openly. They were hidden, catalogued under codes, moved between private vaults, spoken of only among trusted circles of physicians and collectors. Officially, these things did not exist. Unofficially, they became objects of ritualized fascination. Some doctors swore the abnormalities were simply natural mutations, but others whispered darker theories, that these were not random at all, but echoes of something older, some ancient intrusion into the human bloodline. Mordrake, they believed, was not cursed by accident. He was evidence. One letter, never meant for the public, surfaced in 1972 from a medical archivist in Baltimore. He wrote of a specimen X preserved in thick yellow fluid. "It does not rot," the letter reads. "It does not change. Decades pass, and still, the tissues remain pliant, the eyes damp, as though the subject were not entirely dead. We are told not to discuss it, but among us, the truth is said." Haired quietly, "These are not corpses, these are prisons." And that word, prisons, keeps resurfacing, again and again. Doctors describing the remains not as curiosities, but as vessels, containments, not of flesh, but of something bound inside the flesh. Mordrake's head was said to whisper, but what if every one of these specimens did more than rot in jars? What if each was silenced only by glass and chemicals, yet still waiting, watching, seeping through the cracks of secrecy? America's forgotten vaults do not simply preserve medical anomalies. They hold captives, and those who guard them know the truth. They can never, under any circumstances, let the public near them again. If you want to understand the true scale of Mordrake's story, you must follow the trail of the vaults. Secret chambers buried beneath hospitals, universities, and private estates across America. One of the most notorious was a basement under a long-defunct asylum on the outskirts of Boston. The building was outwardly respectable, a brick structure with arched windows and ivy climbing the walls, but below the polished floors, the air never moved. It carried the smell of formaldehyde, decay, and something indefinable, as if the walls themselves were saturated with the screams of the forgotten. Insiders who dared speak of the vault described rooms lined with cabinets behind iron grills, each jar and case meticulously labeled with cryptic codes. Some had letters and numbers like Specimen 412, Mordrake. Others were simple, almost banal, yet grotesque. Male torso, 1872, preserved intact. Infant, triocular, 1891. Adult skull, bifacial, unknown. Names were rare. Faces were more so. And in one corner, according to whispered accounts, Mordrake's own head was stored under thick glass, submerged in a yellowing solution. The second face, the one that had tormented him in life, was said to twitch if anyone lingered too long, as though it remembered. The men who managed these vaults were not ordinary staff. They were carefully chosen, educated, discreet, and ruthless. Some were physicians, others collectors, a few tied to the emerging intelligence networks that dotted the East Coast. Their job was simple on paper: catalogue, maintain, preserve. But those who worked long enough reported subtle, disturbing rules. Do not speak. Do not look too closely. Do not linger. And above all, never, ever let the public or press discover what lies beneath. The vaults operated on a system of surveillance and psychological control, motion detectors, sound-dampening floors, locked doors within, locked doors. Some insiders claimed that the jars themselves seemed to react to intrusion. The yellow fluid would ripple, lids would shake, the eyes of the preserved would appear to track intruders. Mordrake's head, particularly, was said to emit low, whispering tones when left alone in total darkness. Even the most rational men admitted, in private, that the face spoke. It is easy to dismiss these stories as legend. It is safer to do so. But the pattern of disappearances, fires in archives, missing journals, and the precise timing of deaths among those who worked too closely with these vaults suggests something else, that the secrets were real, and the price of knowing them could be death, or madness, or worse. Edward Mordrake was not alone, and the vaults prove it. Those who worked near Edward Mordrake's preserved head did not just witness a physical anomaly, they endured a psychological assault unlike any other. Witnesses describe a sensation that began subtly, a faint unease that escalated the longer one remained in proximity to the jars. The second face, it seems, was not passive. It observed, it judged, and, most disturbingly, it communicated. Whispered words, barely audible, yet unmistakable, slithered into the minds of those close enough to hear. Names, threats, secrets, messages that were never spoken aloud, but lodged themselves in memory with a clarity that felt invasive, as if the face could peer through the soul itself. Doctors and assistants reported sleepless nights, unexplained nausea, and sudden anxiety that no medicine could alleviate. Some claimed the whispers were warnings, instructions to leave before it watches too long, or don't touch what you cannot understand. Others said the voice was mockery, repeating private fears, insecurities, and transgressions in a tone that no human could replicate. The psychological burden grew heavier with each encounter. Those who refused to comply, who lingered, who stared too long, reportedly suffered mental breakdowns. They spoke of the eyes following them through hallways, of lips forming words when the room was silent, of shadows that twisted unnaturally near the specimen. In a few extreme cases, witnesses claimed that the second face could influence behavior. A young assistant reportedly attempted to flee the vault in a panic, only to return hours later, compelled to obey some unseen force. Another, a mid-level curator, vanished after reporting that the face had told him things about the others, things no one should know. His journal was later recovered, pages smeared with ink, words crossed out in frantic loops. He had written repeatedly, "It knows what I fear. It knows what I am." The psychological horror was magnified by isolation. Vaults were designed so that only one or two people could access them at a time. In the silence of these subterranean chambers, the preserved anomalies, particularly Mordrake's head, became more than objects. They were entities, and they demanded recognition. To look away was impossible. To speak was dangerous. To stay, as so many did, was to risk losing a fragment of the self. Edward Mordrake had lived a life tormented by the parasitic presence in his skull. Even in death, the second face perpetuated that torment, extending it outward into the minds of those entrusted with his remains. It was, in every sense, a lesson in fear. Some knowledge, once encountered, never leaves you. The story of Edward Mordrake's second face is not confined to whispers or psychological torment. It is written in disappearances, sudden deaths, and inexplicable accidents that span decades. Those who dared to catalogue or study Mordrake's head, or even touch the jars in which it rested, often vanished without a trace. Names appear in old journals, letters, and scattered medical notes, only to abruptly end. Assistants, janitors, archivists, and even visiting physicians would be seen entering the subterranean vaults, never to leave unscarred, and in many cases, never to leave at all. One of the earliest cases occurred in 1912. A young assistant at a Boston private hospital was tasked with cleaning and inspecting the collection. Days later, colleagues noticed his absence. His apartment remained untouched, his belongings in order, yet he was gone, as if he had evaporated from existence. In his desk, an unfinished note mentioned the second face, and a single line was repeated in jagged handwriting. "It speaks. It knows me." When the staff searched the vault, they found nothing amiss except the slight tilt of Mordrake's head, almost imperceptible, as though watching. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, similar incidents proliferated. Archivists reported strange injuries, lacerations, burns, and scratches with no apparent cause, always near the jars containing specimens. Some were attributed to carelessness, but others defied explanation. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, fire alarms triggered in empty rooms, and windows shattered without wind. And every time a witness attempted to discuss what they experienced, their careers ended abruptly. Some moved away, others fell into mental illness or disappeared entirely. The pattern extended beyond Mordrake. Any specimen deemed abnormal, bifacial skulls, triocular infants, deformed torsos, seemed to carry a curse of observation and retribution. Those who treated them as mere objects were eventually forced to acknowledge the conscious presence within. It was as though each anomaly was a sentinel, guarding the secret of its existence and punishing intrusion. Mordrake's second face became the emblem of a wider truth. There is knowledge that cannot be approached safely, and once seen, it demands a price. Even decades later, investigators who pieced together scattered evidence recognized the same signature: disappearance, fear, erasure, and the lingering impression that someone, or something, had watched, learned, and decided who would live and who would vanish. The story of Mordrake is not just the story of one man's deformity. It is the story of all who glimpsed the forbidden and the inexorable reach of the hidden forces that ensured silence. By the mid-20th century, the handling of Edward Mordrake's head had become part of a larger, highly secretive system, a network that stretched across hospitals, universities, and private estates. These were not casual collectors of curiosities. They were men and women with resources, connections, and an almost religious obsession with controlling the anomalous. Letters between archivists hint at a hierarchy: the curators who maintained the specimens, the guardians who enforced rules, and the shadowy figureheads who decided which items remained in public knowledge and which were condemned to oblivion. Mordrake's head was always at the top of the hierarchy, the crown jewel of a hidden empire of preserved horrors. Within this network, access was restricted. Archives required multiple clearances, codes, and keys, sometimes physical, sometimes psychological. Initiates reported intense scrutiny, long tests of loyalty, and an unspoken understanding. Anyone who disobeyed, lingered too long, or expressed disbelief would vanish, quietly removed from history. Mordrake's head itself was treated as a test. New members were brought before it, and those who survived the experience, some mentally, some barely, were inducted. Many others never returned. Internal reports, partially recovered from burned or confiscated archives, describe the lengths to which these networks went to prevent discovery. Specimens were rotated between institutions, documentation was falsified or destroyed, and any witness outside the circle was discredited as mentally unstable or hysterical. Mordrake's head, in particular, seemed to demand vigilance. Guards reported that even when locked away, the fluid in the jar would ripple without cause, lights would flicker, and the second face would appear to shift expression. Warning, mocking, judging. The network did not see itself as preserving history. It was containment. Each specimen, especially Mordrake's, represented knowledge too dangerous for the world. Medical journals that mentioned abnormalities were quietly suppressed. Police reports referencing missing persons or strange deaths disappeared. Even families of those who vanished were gently persuaded to remain silent. The network's reach extended into newspapers, law enforcement, and academia, ensuring that the anomalies never fully entered public consciousness. In essence, Mordrake's head became a symbol of the network's purpose: control the forbidden, erase the witnesses, and perpetuate the illusion that such things could not, must not, exist. Yet, despite decades of containment, the stories persisted, leaking through diaries, letters, and the recollections of those who had glimpsed the unspeakable. For Mordrake, death had not ended his torment. For those who guarded him, it had only begun. Even within the confines of secret vaults, attempts to study or display Edward Mordrake's head occasionally backfired with disastrous results. In 1953, a prominent medical university in New York received permission to temporarily exhibit the specimen to a select group of anatomists. What was supposed to be a controlled demonstration quickly descended into chaos. Witnesses described sudden power failures, smoke curling from unused electrical panels, and a chilling cold that swept the room in waves. Some attendees claimed the second face had shifted, lips moving in a slow, deliberate whisper, repeating phrases no one dared repeat aloud. One assistant, a young doctoral student, reportedly screamed and collapsed, mumbling incoherent phrases about it knowing all of us, before being carried out unconscious. Attempts to revive him failed until he was removed from the room entirely. A few hours later, 2 of the faculty vanished without explanation. Their offices left neat, their personal belongings untouched, as if they had simply ceased to exist. The incident was quietly erased from official records. No photographs of the display survived, and the head was returned to its vault under increased security, now monitored by armed personnel around the clock. Similar events occurred elsewhere. In a private estate in Philadelphia, a wealthy collector attempted to photograph the head for a publication on medical oddities. When the camera flashed, observers reported seeing shadows twist unnaturally, the second face appearing to smirk directly at them. Within days, the collector's house caught fire under mysterious circumstances. The head was recovered, intact, but the collector himself was never seen again. Even those who approached the specimen under strict secrecy were affected. chronic insomnia, paranoia, and sudden illnesses plagued researchers who spent too long in the Sam's room as the head. Some admitted to hearing whispering in the dark, sentences formed from thoughts they had never spoken, their fears amplified to unbearable proportions. Mordrake's face, though lifeless, functioned as a sentient observer, exacting psychological punishment on anyone who attempted to penetrate its mysteries. The lesson became undeniable to those within the inner circle. The second face was not a relic to be studied, nor a curiosity to be displayed. It was an active agent of retribution, a force that extended beyond death, ensuring that some knowledge remained forbidden. Those who underestimated it or sought to challenge the boundaries imposed by the hidden network invariably paid a price, sometimes in madness, sometimes in disappearance, sometimes in both. Among the whispers surrounding Edward Mordrake's head, a handful of first-hand accounts survived, rare confessions recorded in journals, letters, and private memoirs that the network failed to confiscate. These witnesses described an experience that defied reason. The second face did not merely observe, it communicated. At first, the words were fragmented, incoherent syllables that grated against the mind. But over time, for those unfortunate or attuned enough, the voice became articulate, deliberate, and terrifyingly personal. One diary, belonging to a mid-level curator in Boston, recounts an encounter in precise, chilling detail. He wrote of standing before the jar, alone in a windowless room, when he first heard it. "Do you see what I see? Do you know what I know?" The voice seemed to emerge from within his own thoughts, yet carried the intonation, mockery, and timbre of a sentient being. The face asked questions about memories the curator had never spoken aloud, sins he had long buried, and fears he had never acknowledged. Each answer, or hesitation, elicited a subtle shift in expression, a frown, a smirk, a lip curling into a mockery of his own features. Other witnesses reported more specific revelations. The head, they claimed, could identify hidden truths about the vault, the specimens, and even the network itself. Secrets thought secure for decades were whispered to intruders, often with an unsettling indifference to their reaction. A letter from an archivist in Philadelphia describes hearing the voice reveal names of missing assistants, locations of other hidden specimens, and cryptic warnings like, "Do not disturb the living, the dead will watch." Those who documented these encounters noted that the knowledge imparted was double-edged. Understanding it seemed to bind the observer to it, a silent contract that could not be broken. The effect on witnessing was profound. Many went mad, unable to reconcile the truths they had glimpsed with the reality they lived. Others disappeared, leaving no trace but hastily scrawled notes hinting at forbidden insights. A select few, however, emerged transformed, quieter, more vigilant, attuned to patterns and secrets that the ordinary world ignored. For them, the second face was not merely a relic, but a teacher of hidden knowledge, cruel, demanding, and absolute in its authority. Mordrake's second face, in life and death, remained a gatekeeper. To hear it speak was to glimpse the forbidden, and to glimpse it was to be changed forever. Whether by fear, madness, or an unsettling enlightenment no one else could comprehend. By the early 20th century, Edward Mordrake's head had become more than a curiosity. It had evolved into a symbol, a talisman of forbidden power that occult societies, clandestine medical groups, and secretive academic circles sought to control. These were organizations operating in the shadows, far beyond public scrutiny. They understood that Mordrake's second face was not simply a deformity, but a conduit, a source of knowledge that could grant insight into hidden forces, human nature, and mortality itself. Initiates whispered that whoever controlled the head could manipulate fear, observe secrets, and influence those who were unaware of its presence. Letters recovered from one such society, the so-called Silent Order of Anatomists, describe elaborate rituals performed in the presence of Mordrake's head. Candles were arranged in circles, protective glyphs drawn on walls, and participants would recite prayers or invocations to maintain the fragile boundary between the observer and the observed. Despite these precautions, accidents and disappearances persisted. One memoir, smuggled out before confiscation, describes a night when a junior member, disregarding the rules, laughed at the face. By morning, he had vanished. His absence was never questioned publicly. The remaining members claimed he had left the order, but those closest knew the truth. Mordrake's second face had judged him, and judgment was irrevocable. Medical societies also sought the head, not for ritual, but for experimental purposes. Surgeons, pathologists, and anatomists obsessed over the specimen, hoping to understand the origins of congenital anomalies or the mysteries of cranial duplication. Reports indicate that even the most rational, scientifically minded individuals suffered from paranoia, insomnia, and hallucinations after prolonged exposure. The second face seemed to respond to intent, curiosity, fear, skepticism. Each emotion evoked subtle movements, whispers, and expressions that fed back into the observer's mind, warping reality. Over time, Mordrake's head became a nexus between the esoteric and the scientific, bridging hidden societies and clandestine research networks. Instructions circulated in ciphered letters about its storage, handling, and even methods of interpretation. Knowledge of the specimen was both coveted and feared. Those who sought to exploit it often did so at the cost of their own sanity or their lives. The head was no longer merely a relic of one tragic man. It had become a living instrument of control, a sentinel of forbidden understanding, influencing events far beyond the walls of any vault. The lesson was clear. Edward Mordrake's second face did not belong to history alone. It belonged to those willing to pay the price for forbidden insight, and it ensured, with relentless precision, that all intruders understood the cost. Throughout the 20th century, there were only a handful of documented attempts to neutralize or permanently hide Edward Mordrake's head, each ending in failure, terror, or disappearance. One of the earliest recorded efforts occurred in 1927, when a group of prominent anatomists and occultists collaborated to encase the head in a reinforced lead and glass sarcophagus. Their goal was simple: seal it away from human contact, render it inert, and prevent further influence. Yet, despite every precaution, witnesses reported that the second face continued to move behind the opaque glass, subtly shifting expressions, lips curling into silent threats, eyes following each intruder with unnerving precision. Within weeks, members of the containment team began experiencing unexplained illnesses, high fevers, hallucinations, and compulsive obsessions with the head. One by one, they vanished, leaving behind only hastily scribbled notes, fragmented diagrams, and obsessive warnings about the dangers of underestimating the specimen. A few survivors claimed that attempts to physically isolate the head only intensified its presence, a paradoxical effect that suggested it was not bound by normal physical laws. In the 1940s, during wartime, another effort was made. Mordrake's head was transferred to a remote military facility, placed in a subterranean vault designed to prevent light, sound, and human observation. The purpose was to study it under controlled conditions while keeping it removed from civilian knowledge. Yet the head's influence extended beyond the vault walls. Reports from guards describe sudden power surges, alarms activating without reason, and distant whispers echoing through empty corridors. One officer, attempting to document his observations, reportedly wrote that the second face spoke in full sentences. "You cannot hide me. You cannot contain knowledge that lives in the blood and bone of men." Within months, several personnel had disappeared, and the project was quietly abandoned. Even when the head was moved again, rumors suggest it was never fully secured. Accounts from private collectors and secret societies indicate that no location has ever truly contained it. Mordrake's second face seemed to defy human intervention, a persistent sentinel of forbidden truths that refused to be erased. Every attempt to conceal or neutralize it reinforced its legend, a living proof that some knowledge is too dangerous, too alive, to remain hidden. The lesson endured. The head was not merely an object. It was a force, intelligent, vigilant, and ruthless. Punishing those who assumed control could ever be permanent. Attempts at finality were illusions. The cost of intrusion remained absolute and inescapable. Even in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Edward Mordrake's head continued to cast its shadow across the living, leaving a trail of unexplained disappearances, sudden deaths, and whispered terror. Investigative reports, some leaked from private archives, and others buried in classified files, document cases where individuals connected to the head, researchers, collectors, and even casual witnesses, vanished under circumstances that defied rational explanation. In several instances, entire families reported loved ones disappearing overnight, leaving behind untouched homes, undisturbed belongings, and a lingering sense that something had silently observed their final moments. A particularly chilling account involves a mid-level curator in New England who claimed to have stumbled upon the head while cataloguing a collection inherited from a private society. Within days, he began hearing soft whispers at night, the voice emanating from dark corners of his house, repeating his deepest fears and secrets in a tone both mocking and urgent. Neighbors later found his residence empty, meals left half-eaten, personal effects neatly in place, but the man himself gone, as if he had been erased from reality itself. Attempts to trace him ended at a single burned-out storage facility in which his correspondence had been found, including notes warning others never to approach the head. Other modern cases reveal a pattern: sudden, inexplicable deaths among those who sought to study Mordrake's remains, or who attempted to locate lost archives referencing him. Physicians, scientists, and even journalists reported symptoms consistent with severe psychological trauma, hallucinations, paranoia, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Several admitted to hearing the second face speak directly to them, revealing fragments of forbidden knowledge, details of ancient experiments, occult practices, and human manipulation that had been intentionally erased from public records. In the most extreme cases, the head's influence seemed to extend beyond the immediate vicinity. Those who merely heard of its location or viewed photographs of the specimen reported nightmares, compulsive behaviors, and, in some instances, physical ailments leading to sudden death. Mordrake's presence was no longer limited to a jar in a vault. It had become a ripple effect, a malign consciousness that transcended space and time, exacting judgment on anyone who dared pry too deeply. The modern reality of Edward Mordrake's head is clear. It is not simply a historical curiosity. It is a force that continues to enforce its own rules, a living testament to the price of forbidden knowledge. For those who encounter it, knowingly or by accident, the past and present merge, revealing that death may end a life, but it does not end the consequences of curiosity. Those rare individuals who survived encounters with Edward Mordrake's head emerged irrevocably altered, their minds and moral compass reshaped by an experience most would describe as inhuman. Psychologists and clandestine researchers who interviewed survivors noted an almost uniform pattern: heightened awareness, acute paranoia, and an obsessive need to catalog and control information. Ordinary concerns and social norms seemed trivial compared to the awareness of hidden structures, unseen forces, and the pervasive influence of knowledge that should never be touched. Survivors described an overwhelming sense of observation, as if the second face could peer not only into the physical world, but into the recesses of their thoughts. They reported being haunted by whispers that revealed inconvenient truths about friends, colleagues, and even themselves, secrets they had never admitted aloud. One chemist who narrowly escaped the head's proximity admitted in his notes that he began seeing patterns in human behavior that suggested an invisible network of influence stretching across decades, a silent hierarchy of manipulation and control. The experience left him detached, capable of extreme analytical clarity, but estranged from normal emotional responses. Another survivor, a historian who accidentally encountered photographs and letters referencing the head, described what he called an enforced morality. The voice compelled him to consider consequences beyond immediate human understanding. Ethical decisions now weighed against hidden systems, ancient knowledge, and consequences that could ripple silently across lives. He became a recluse, obsessively documenting obscure historical anomalies, each entry a protective measure against potential interference from forces he could not name, yet profoundly feared. In every account, the survivor's sense of identity shifted. Ordinance. Wry fears were replaced with hyper-vigilance. Casual curiosity became dangerous obsession. Some developed compulsive rituals, from meticulously tracking human behavior to avoiding certain rooms or light patterns, as a means of survival. Yet even with these adaptations, all confessed that the second face lingered in their mind, a permanent presence that could not be ignored or silenced. Edward Mordrake's head, therefore, does not simply punish, it transforms. It imposes a new lens through which to view reality, one that merges moral and existential awareness with an almost unbearable clarity. Survivors are left with a single, haunting truth. The cost of forbidden knowledge is not only life or death, it is the very architecture of the mind itself, forever reshaped by forces no human was meant to comprehend. By the mid-20th century, Edward Mordrake's story had transcended individual curiosity, evolving into a tool wielded by secretive networks and underground institutions. These were not mere collectors or scholars. They were architects of influence, guardians of knowledge that society at large was never meant to access. Within their ranks, Mordrake's head was both a relic and a symbol, a means to command obedience, enforce silence, and instill fear in anyone who strayed too close to truths deemed dangerous. The legend itself became a mechanism of control, repeated in whispers, coded letters, and veiled instructions to ensure that only those deemed worthy could glimpse even fragments of its power. Members of these societies operated like shadow bureaucracies, carefully tracking researchers, historians, and journalists who had encountered Mordrake's head. They maintained dossiers on behavioral anomalies, psychological fragility, and intellectual curiosity, determining who could be allowed access and who must be removed from the equation entirely. In some cases, entire families were quietly relocated, their histories erased, or subjected to subtle coercion to prevent further exposure. The second face was more than a specimen. It was a sentinel, and these societies were its agents, enforcing boundaries that few understood and even fewer survived crossing. Letters, partially censored and smuggled out of private archives, reveal the extent of coordination. Meetings in remote estates, coded dispatches sent between international enclaves, and ritualistic training designed to sensitize operatives to Mordrake's influence. The head itself was used as a testing ground for obedience, discipline, and psychological resilience. One account describes a young operative instructed to sit before the specimen for hours without blinking, while it whispered personal secrets and moral quanda. Rise. Failure to comply, the notes indicate, was met not with punishment in the conventional sense, but with inexplicable accidents, disappearances, or lifelong obsession. The lesson was consistent. Knowledge without restraint is fatal, and curiosity is a weapon if left unchecked. Through this network, Mordrake's head became a linchpin in a larger architecture of control, a bridge between hidden history, clandestine science, and occult influence. The legend was perpetuated intentionally, ensuring that fear and respect maintained boundaries. Those who stumbled upon the story, even by accident, were quietly evaluated, manipulated, or removed, often without ever knowing why. In essence, the head dictated not only its own fate, but the behavior and survival of anyone who dared acknowledge its existence. Edward Mordrake's legacy had evolved. The man was gone, but the system he inspired, fear, obsession, and control, endured, carefully curated by those who understood that forbidden knowledge is not meant to be free. Scattered across private collections, hidden archives, and forgotten attics are the artifacts, letters, and journals left by those who came face to face with Edward Mordrake's head. Each item bears a silent weight, a warning etched in ink, graphite, or the careful folds of paper. These remnants reveal a consistent pattern. Every person who documented their experiences did so in a manner both meticulous and obsessive, often hiding messages within ciphers, obscure references, or seemingly mundane details that, to the untrained eye, appear trivial. But within these writings lies a map of survival, instructions on how to interact with the head, cryptic moral guidance, and unmistakable evidence that the specimen was alive in ways that defied logic. One particularly striking journal, smuggled from a decommissioned laboratory in New England, details the author's daily encounters with the second face. The writer described how it whispered secrets about neighbors, colleagues, and even himself, revealing hidden sins and desires he never acknowledged. To cope, he encoded his observations in a layered system of symbols and shorthand, ensuring that anyone reading the journal without the key would find only confusion. Hidden among the pages were sketches of the face's subtle movements, expressions so minute they might escape normal observation, yet critical to understanding its influence. The journal concludes with a dire warning. Do not seek comprehension beyond what is granted. Curiosity is the chain that binds the soul to the head. Other artifacts, including letters exchanged between secret societies and private collectors, reveal a similar caution. Words are carefully chosen to instruct, mislead, or intimidate, conveying more through omission than explicit detail. Certain correspondences mention vanished associates, mislaid journals, or destroyed evidence, each a silent testament to the consequences of overstepping boundaries. A recurring motif appears in these letters, the duality of observation and judgment, the idea that the second face not only watches but evaluates, measuring the intentions of anyone daring to approach too closely. Even physical relics, preserved tools, glass jars, and anatomical charts carry an eerie energy. Survivors and collectors who interacted with them report compulsive behaviors, sleepless nights, and a constant sense of being observed. Every artifact left behind is a fragment of a larger warning system, a guide to understanding both the head's capabilities and the cost of arrogance. They serve as reminders that Edward Mordrake's second face was more than a historical anomaly. It was an active force, shaping behavior, punishing transgression, and encoding its legacy in ways designed to endure long after the observer had left the room. Edward Mordrake's story did not remain confined to the borders of the United States. Throughout the 20th century, reports of inexplicable encounters, second-face phenomena, and the lingering influence of the specimen began to emerge across Europe, Asia, and even remote regions of South America. Scholars and clandestine investigators noted that wherever knowledge of Mordrake spread, whether through leaked photographs, journal excerpts, or whispered tales, anomalies followed. Witnesses described fleeting shadows, disembodied whispers, and sudden bouts of psychological terror that mirrored accounts from those who had seen the head in the United States. In one case from post-war Germany, a curator at a small medical museum claimed to have encountered a visitor, a man whose presence radiated a chilling familiarity, who spoke extensively of Mordrake's dual visage and its capacity to observe beyond mere physical sight. The curator later found himself haunted by nightmarish visions, auditory hallucinations, and the obsessive compulsion to catalogue every detail of the incident. His journals reveal that the second face seemed to transcend geography, as if knowledge of its existence could ripple across continents, reaching the minds of the curious or the reckless. In Asia, a series of letters intercepted by intelligence agencies documented a network of collectors who referenced Mordrake in discussions about occult science and human manipulation. These accounts suggest that the specimen's legend became a tool to enforce obedience, extract information, and evaluate moral resilience, echoing the clandestine practices observed in the United States. Whispers of disappearances, sudden deaths, and obsessive behaviors were consistently tied to individuals who sought direct contact with Mordrake's history or artifacts, indicating that the phenomenon was not localized, but global in reach. Even in remote regions, where folklore and superstition dominate, Mordrake's influence found resonance. Travelers and missionaries recorded stories of a watching face, always present but unseen, judging and revealing hidden truths. Anthropologists dismissed these tales as myth, yet patterns of obsession, disappearance, and psychological disturbance mirrored those documented in archival records from Culper and private collections in New England. The consistency is undeniable. Mordrake's legend acts as a conduit for a universal principle. Forbidden knowledge is never contained, and the consequences of exposure are absolute, transcending borders, cultures, and generations. Edward Mordrake's second face, once thought to be a tragic anomaly of a single man, had become a force of global reach, a persistent echo of fear, observation, and judgment that humanity could neither ignore nor control. Its influence suggested a horrifying truth. Some knowledge is too dangerous to be confined, and some eyes, even in death, never truly close. As the legend of Edward Mordrake permeated beyond private curiosity, certain government agencies and clandestine organizations recognized its potential as a tool of psychological manipulation. Classified reports, some declassified decades later, reveal that intelligence operatives studied the head not merely as an artifact, but as a conduit for influence over the human mind. The objective was clear: harness the fear, the obsessive fascination, and the destabilizing power of Mordrake's dual visage to control behavior, test loyalty, and extract information from those considered high-value targets. In early Cold War files, agents were instructed to expose select individuals to photographs, journals, and second-hand accounts of Mordrake's head, monitoring their responses. Psychological profiles reveal that most subjects exhibited extreme anxiety, compulsive observation, and paranoia, reactions meticulously recorded and analyzed. Some operatives became instruments of their own study, compelled to mimic the silence and secrecy the head inspired, while others vanished under circumstances eerily reminiscent of historical disappearances. The protocols were precise. Fear was weaponized, curiosity was a liability, and knowledge, once triggered, could not be contained. Private institutions, often intertwined with intelligence efforts, pursued similar experimentation under the guise of research or historical preservation. Scholars were offered access to Mordrake's letters, diagrams, and artifacts, but always under strict surveillance. Failure to adhere to protocols resulted in sudden accidents, unexplained resignations, or long-term psychological breakdowns. In some cases, entire teams working with the head were reassigned or disbanded without explanation, leaving only the records and cryptic notes behind, often coded with warnings for future operatives. Do not awaken the their face without understanding the cost. What emerges from these accounts is a chilling realization. Edward Mordrake's second face became a medium through which institutions exerted influence, testing the limits of human obedience, fear, and moral judgment. It was a living experiment, one that blurred the line between myth and operational strategy. The head's influence was weaponized not with conventional arms, but with the quiet terror of forbidden knowledge, the subtle disintegration of reality, and the unrelenting weight of observation, proving that power does not always manifest through force. Sometimes it manifests through the mind itself. The historical record confirms one immutable truth. Mordrake was no longer merely a curiosity of medical oddity. He had become a mechanism of control, a dark instrument wielded by those who understood that fear and obsession, once unleashed, are as potent as any army. Some who encountered Edward Mordrake's head, or even its shadow in legend, attempted defiance. They believed that courage, intellect, or moral fortitude could shield them from the obsessive grasp of the second face. The records, however, reveal a consistent pattern. Resistance was possible only in fleeting moments, and the consequences were immediate, cruel, and psychologically irreversible. Survivors' journals describe a creeping presence, a silent observation that intensified with every act of rebellion. Attempts to destroy, hide, or expose the head were met with accidents, disappearances, or inexplicable mental deterioration, a testament to the head's agency, as though it anticipated each move before it occurred. One case involved a young archivist in Boston who, upon uncovering Mordrake-related journals, attempted to alert the press. His writings describe a sudden paralysis of will, a compulsion to record every detail obsessively, and an overwhelming dread that left him incapable of leaving his study. Within weeks, he vanished, leaving only a meticulously organized room of notes and sketches, detailing every failure, every observation, every warning he had ignored. Those who found the room later reported an uncanny sense of being watched, as if the archivist's experience had left a permanent imprint on the space itself. Another account, recorded in a hidden European archive, tells of a researcher who tried to resist the head's influence by traveling relentlessly, avoiding mirrors, refraining from reading letters or examining photographs. Even with these precautions, the individual reported hearing whispers, observing fleeting movements in peripheral vision, and feeling the weight of a judgment that transcended distance. Ultimately, he succumbed to paranoia, isolating himself entirely, incapable of contact or normal perception. The head had extended its reach, not through proximity alone, but through knowledge, legend, and the inescapable awareness of observation. These accounts converge on a terrifying principle. Defiance is met not with simple punishment, but with transformation. Resistance exposes the mind to the full magnitude of the head's awareness, amplifying fear, obsessive attention, and moral scrutiny. Attempting to outwit or evade Mordrake's influence only tightens its hold, revealing the fundamental truth hidden in every surviving journal and artifact. Forbidden knowledge is not merely dangerous to the body, it reshapes the mind, and those who resist its power are never truly free. Edward Mordrake's second face, then, is not merely a relic of a bygone tragedy. It is a mechanism of judgment and control, ensuring that curiosity carries cost, that defiance is a lesson, and that even the bravest or most cunning are vulnerable to its inexorable reach. Scattered across the archives, journals, and private collections are recurring symbols, geometric arrangements, and ritualistic patterns that defy conventional explanation. These artifacts, often associated with Edward Mordrake or his supposed experiments, suggest a purpose beyond simple documentation, an intentional encoding of power, influence, and perhaps even metaphysical communication. Observers consistently report that these designs are not arbitrary. Spirals, interlocking triangles, concentric circles, and obscure sigils appear repeatedly, each variation calibrated with obsessive precision. Those who study them closely describe a disorienting effect, a creeping awareness, a sense that the symbols themselves are alive, observing, and responding to human thought. In the journals of one 19th-century operative tasked with cataloguing Mordrake-related items, meticulous sketches reveal how objects belonging to the missing or influenced were arranged in ritualistic patterns. Watches, books, personal effects, and even clothing were placed with such symmetry and order that the margins of perception seemed to bend, an uncanny resonance described as both hypnotic and terrifying. The operative rites of moments when the air itself seemed charged, a subtle vibration that intensified whenever he attempted to alter the patterns or ignore the prescribed order. It is as though the world outside ceases to exist, he notes, and the symbols watch, judge, and enforce compliance without mercy. Some researchers theorized that these geometric patterns served as conduits, channels connecting Mordrake's second face to consciousness itself. They were not merely ceremonial, they were operational, creating a bridge between knowledge, fear, and influence. In some cases, the patterns were traced on floors, carved into furniture, or etched into walls, each site reporting a similar size. Sociological effect: heightened anxiety, compulsion, hallucinations, and in extreme cases, complete mental breakdown. Even distance did not guarantee safety, as photographs and sketches of the arrangements carried the same weight of obsession when studied remotely. The recurring conclusion across multiple accounts is chilling. The patterns were a language, a code, and a mechanism for control. They suggest that Mordrake's influence is not confined to a physical artifact. It can propagate through representation, replication, and human attention. Those who attempt to decipher, manipulate, or resist the designs invariably experience escalating consequences, an encoded warning, a tangible imprint of the head's judgment. In essence, Mordrake's legacy extends through the invisible geometry of fear, observation, and authority, proving that even shapes and symbols, when linked to forbidden knowledge, can become instruments of power beyond comprehension. Behind the veil of ordinary history exists a network of custodians, individuals and clandestine groups who have quietly maintained Mordrake's artifacts, journals, and remnants for generations. These keepers are not merely collectors, they are archivists of influence, safeguarding objects that carry both knowledge and danger, ensuring that the power encoded in the second face endures. Their work is meticulous, obsessive, and often anonymous, guided by unwritten rules that balance preservation with secrecy. Each member understands that exposure carries consequences far beyond embarrassment or legal risk. It invites the very force they seek to contain. Letters and encrypted communications reveal a hierarchy among these custodians, a structure designed to prevent misuse while facilitating study. Those at lower levels are often unaware of the full scope, handling items, transcribing notes, or arranging patterns without grasping their true function. Only the most trusted, individuals who have demonstrated resilience, intellect, and discretion, gain access to the core knowledge, the techniques, rituals, and warnings directly linked to Mordrake's second face. Even among these elite few, psychological strain is inevitable, as the presence of forbidden knowledge exerts subtle pressure, testing loyalty, morality, and sanity. The networks also manipulate history, guiding how Mordrake's story reaches the public, and controlling what is classified as myth versus fact. Some documents are leaked strategically, often altered to obscure crucial details or encode warnings. Others are buried entirely, lost to fire, flood, or misplacement, only to resurface decades later when conditions are deemed safe. In every case, the goal is clear: maintain the legend as a living entity, capable of exerting influence on those curious or daring enough to seek it. The custodians understand that the second face is not static. It grows stronger through attention, study, and even fear. Accounts of encounters with the network itself are rare but illuminating. Outsiders report strange rituals, encrypted messages, and unspoken rules enforced with subtle but unmistakable authority. Those who disobey, probe too deeply, or attempt to remove items from the network's care often vanish, fall into madness, or are quietly exiled. The network functions as both guardian and enforcer, a living mechanism ensuring Mordrake's legacy endures while remaining inaccessible to the uninitiated. Edward Mordrake's second face, therefore, is not only an artifact of historical fascination. Through these hidden custodians, it exists as a perpetuating force, a sentinel of forbidden knowledge and a quiet manipulator of history itself, proving that some secrets are never abandoned and some shadows are never extinguished. Despite centuries of careful suppression, Edward Mordrake's legend has found a way to persist into the modern era, surfacing in ways that defy conventional logic. Digital platforms, social media, and online archives have become the new conduits for the second face, transmitting both fascination and fear to millions who are unaware of the true cost of their curiosity. From obscure forums to viral videos claiming sightings, the pattern is consistent. The moment someone engages deeply with Mordrake's story, they report experiences eerily reminiscent of the historical accounts. Whispers in the night, shadows moving at the edge of vision, and sudden compulsions to document or share. Investigators tracking these digital traces note a disturbing phenomenon. Algorithms inadvertently amplify content connected to Mordrake, spreading videos, images, and written accounts with unusual velocity. Followers, researchers, or casual viewers often describe heightened anxiety, obsessive thoughts, or vivid nightmares after encountering even tangential references. Some even claim fleeting glimpses of a second face in reflections, photographs, or video streams. Experiences dismissed as coincidence or digital artifacts, yet consistent enough to suggest a persistent, interactive presence. The second face, it seems, has adapted to new mediums, evolving from a localized terror into a global, intangible force. A particularly chilling example comes from a small online community dedicated to macabre historical mysteries. Participants, encouraged to share their findings, began reporting disappearances of members or unexplained alterations in their posts. Moderators discovered hidden, recurring symbols embedded in user-shared images, almost imperceptible at first glance, echoing the geometric patterns historically linked to Mordrake. Those who attempted to remove or obscure the symbols reported sudden paranoia, intense sleeplessness, and obsessive recording of every detail. A modern mirror of the psychological manipulation endured by 19th-century witnesses and custodians alike. Even in mainstream media, references to Mordrake spark uncanny consequences. Documentaries, films, and articles sometimes generate patterns of obsession in audiences who engage beyond casual consumption. Scholars studying these phenomena have noted an eerie resemblance to historical reports. The more one seeks to understand, the more the presence intensifies, exerting influence across distance, culture, and technological medium. It is as though the second face has transcended time, geography, and now even the physical plane, insinuating itself into human consciousness wherever curiosity allows entry. Edward Mordrake's legend in the modern era is no longer merely historical curiosity. It is an active, evolving force. It teaches the same lesson across centuries. Forbidden knowledge has a life of its own, resistant to containment, and those who pursue it, even digitally, awaken attention and influence that cannot be ignored, proving once again that some secrets follow the mind relentlessly, adapting to ensure their power endures. In the 21st century, a growing number of personal accounts suggest that Edward Mordrake's second face is no longer confined to legend or artifact. It has become an interactive presence, capable of influencing perception, thought, and even behavior. One case involves a university student who, while researching historical medical anomalies, discovered a forgotten archive of Mordrake's correspondence. Within days, she reported vivid hallucinations, fleeting glimpses of a shadowed face in mirrors, whispers echoing through empty halls, and an unshakable sense of being observed. Attempts to ignore the phenomena only intensified them, until she was forced to abandon the research entirely, leaving detailed notes warning others of the consequences. Another testimony comes from a software developer who, while creating a database of macabre historical figures, encountered images and symbols associated with Mordrake embedded in digital repositories. Almost immediately, he experienced sleep paralysis, auditory hallucinations, and an obsessive compulsion to document every interaction with the files. He describes a sensation of dual observation, as if one self was interacting with the data while another, unseen consciousness watched, critiqued, and subtly manipulated his actions. Attempts to delete or remove the files were met with inexplicable system failures, sudden data corruption, and in one instance, a complete computer shutdown at the precise moment he looked away from the screen. Even casual viewers report uncanny encounters. Online forums contain numerous anecdotes of individuals who claim that after engaging with Mordrake-related media, images, videos, or writings, they began noticing subtle distortions in reflections, shadows that move independently, and an overwhelming, almost hypnotic need to revisit the content repeatedly. In extreme cases, users report long-term anxiety, compulsive behavior, or auditory hallucinations. A digital echo of the psychological manipulation historically associated with the second face. Medical professionals and psychologists have studied some of these cases, and while many explanations range from stress-induced psychosis to pattern recognition errors, the consistency across diverse environments, cultures, and technological mediums is striking. There appears to be an enduring, cross-generational force at work. The second face of Edward Mordrake, capable of exploiting curiosity, observation, and attention to infiltrate consciousness itself. The evidence is undeniable. Mordrake's legend has evolved beyond artifact and story. It has become an active, participatory phenomenon. Those who encounter it, willingly or not, are drawn into a web of psychological influence, reinforcing the truth that forbidden knowledge carries consequences, and that some presences, once awakened, never truly release their hold. Edward Mordrake's second face has not existed in isolation. Historical accounts, private journals, and clandestine reports suggest that certain secret societies and occult practitioners actively sought to understand, and in some cases harness, the influence of the dual visage. These groups recognize the unique psychological and metaphysical properties of the second face, its capacity to observe, manipulate, and dominate consciousness. Rituals were devised to invoke its presence, communicate with it, or even channel its subtle authority into human agents. Many of these rites remain undocumented, hidden behind layers of code, allegory, and silence, but fragments reveal a deliberate and chilling purpose. Descriptions from esoteric manuscripts portray ceremonial spaces carefully arranged with objects, symbols, and diagrams, mirroring those discovered in historical Mordrake sites. Candles, mirrors, and personal artifacts were positioned according to intricate geometric patterns, echoing the spirals, triangles, and concentric circles associated with the second face. Initiates report that the effect of these arrangements was immediate, a heightened sense of observation, compulsion to follow ritual instructions precisely, and, in some cases, visions of the second face itself. Those who deviated experienced sudden anxiety, paralysis of will, or inexplicable misfortune, reinforcing the idea that Mordrake's presence was not merely symbolic but operational, a force that enforced compliance through psychological and possibly supernatural influence. Evidence suggests that members of these secret societies did not merely study Mordrake, they sought symbiosis. By invoking his influence through ritual, they hoped to acquire insight, power, and control over others, mirroring the psychological manipulation Mordrake's second face historically exerted. Some reports indicate the creation of proxy vessels, individuals trained or conditioned to carry out the will of the face in distant locations, perpetuating influence without the need for direct interaction. These vessels often suffered mental fragmentation, hallucinations, or obsessive behaviors, demonstrating that the second face's reach was far more pervasive than previously understood. Modern occult researchers who have attempted to trace these networks describe a terrifying continuum. from 19th century journals and artifacts to secret societies of the early 20th century, culminating in digital age cults and online esoteric circles. Across centuries, the methods evolve, but the principle remains the same. Forbidden knowledge, combined with disciplined ritual, magnifies the reach of Mordrake's presence, leaving every participant exposed to psychological and perhaps metaphysical consequences. The lesson is clear. Mordrake's second face is not just a historical curiosity or artifact of tragedy. It is a functional entity, a tool and a weapon, a force that secret societies have sought to command for centuries, and one whose power continues to resonate wherever obsession, fear, and ritual converge. Throughout history, there have been individuals who, drawn by curiosity, ambition, or obsession, have attempted to replicate Edward Mordrake's dual-faced phenomenon. These experiments are rarely documented in mainstream records, but hidden journals, police reports, and private correspondences reveal a chilling pattern. Those who try to emulate Mordrake's condition, whether through anatomical experimentation, ritualistic invocation, or psychological conditioning, often descend into madness, disappear, or die under inexplicable circumstances. The pattern is consistent across decades and continents, suggesting that the second face is not merely a medical anomaly, but a replicable, malevolent force with its own rules of operation. One notable account comes from a mid-20th century anatomist who became obsessed with creating a living embodiment of the dual-faced condition. Using cadaver studies, chemical experiments, and behavioral conditioning on willing or coerced subjects, he attempted to induce the appearance of a second face, coupled with an autonomous consciousness. According to his private diary, initial successes were promising, but within weeks the subjects displayed disturbing signs, muttering in voices that were not their own, sudden violent outbursts, and complete detachment from reality. By the end, all of his subjects had vanished or were institutionalized, leaving only notes warning future researchers to abandon the work. Similarly, occultists attempting to summon the second face through ritualistic imitation of Mordrake's practices faced comparable consequences. They report that even partial success brings psychological terror, shadowed whispers, unseen observation, and uncontrollable compulsions to document or replicate the process. In some cases, followers vanish entirely, leaving behind only cryptic symbols, geometric arrangements, or notes written in languages no one can decipher. Those who survive describe a relentless, oppressive presence that persists in their thoughts, driving them to obsession, isolation, or self-harm. What emerges from these cases is unmistakable. The second face is not an anomaly to be studied, conquered, or replicated. It is a force that enforces rules, punishes hubris, and defies conventional understanding. Its power is transferable through action, attention, and imitation, making every attempt to recreate it an invitation to destruction. Every copied experiment strengthens its mythos, spreading influence and ensuring that those who seek it risk the same fate as the original, a slow, inexorable descent into madness, disappearance, or death. Edward Mordrake's dual-faced curse, therefore, is not contained in history. It is a replicable terror, a cautionary blueprint. The lesson remains constant. The forbidden cannot be imitated safely, and curiosity, when directed at the wrong knowledge, carries consequences that cannot be reversed. The second face of Edward Mordrake does not reveal itself to everyone. Historical accounts and modern testimonies suggest that certain psychological traits make individuals more susceptible to its influence. Curiosity mingled with obsession, intelligence intertwined with isolation, and a willingness to confront darkness that others instinctively avoid. Those drawn to Mordrake's legend often exhibit what psychologists describe as anomalous openness to the macabre, a compulsion to seek out forbidden knowledge, analyze the abnormal, and immerse themselves in stories that frighten ordinary minds. This openness, however, comes at a cost, rendering them vulnerable to psychological manipulation by forces they do not fully understand. Many who encounter Mordrake-related phenomena display patterns of fixation. They repeatedly revisit historical documents, images, and accounts. They organize, transcribe, and annotate with near ritualistic precision. Sleep is disrupted, thoughts are haunted by fleeting visions and ordinary reflections. A mirror, a photograph, or even a shadow become triggers for hallucination or compulsion. The second face appears to target weaknesses in perception and obsession, embedding itself subtly into the mind of the observer until control, however small, is ceded willingly or unconsciously. Historical examples reinforce this pattern. Students, artists, scientists, and occult practitioners drawn to Mordrake often began as skeptical, analytical observers, yet gradually descended into paranoia, compulsive documentation, and social isolation. Some developed auditory and visual phenomena, claiming to hear whispers or see the second face appearing in reflective surfaces, even when no physical presence existed. The more they resisted, the stronger the influence became. The more they embraced curiosity, the deeper the psychological bond. Modern digital environments amplify this effect. Online forums, videos, and archival images act as conduits for attention, drawing susceptible individuals into cycles of reinforcement. The algorithmic spread of Mordrake-related content ensures that those who seek it are frequently exposed, strengthening compulsion and obsession. In essence, the second face operates as a predator of cognition, selectively engaging minds predisposed to fascination, ensuring that its legend continues to propagate while consuming the mental energy of its observers. Edward Mordrake's dual-faced presence, therefore, is not random. It is selective, targeting those capable of obsession, study, and fear. It is as though the face chooses its observers, rewarding those drawn to it with glimpses of forbidden knowledge, while punishing the unwary with psychological disruption, obsession, or worse. In every case, those who fall under its gaze are forever altered, and the more one resists, the more relentless the influence becomes, a force that tests mind, spirit, and self-control with every encounter. Long after Edward Mordrake's death, a disturbing trail of correspondence and coded messages emerged, suggesting that his second face continued to exert influence beyond the physical plane. These documents, preserved in private collections, libraries, and secret archives, appear innocuous at first. Letters addressed to unnamed recipients, diaries filled with fragmented observations, and meticulously crafted symbols that defy conventional interpretation. Yet closer examination reveals a deliberate pattern, as though Mordrake, or the consciousness of the second face, was speaking through time, guiding, warning, or manipulating those who stumbled upon his legacy. One particularly chilling collection consists of letters exchanged between early 20th century occultists who claimed direct communication with Mordrake. The texts, written in cryptic code, often contained instructions for rituals, psychological exercises, and experimental procedures, many of which mirrored the original patterns observed in Mordrake's historical accounts. Some recipients reported profound effects: altered perception, obsessive recording of the symbols, and fleeting visions of a second face appearing in mirrors, shadows, and reflective surfaces. Those who failed to follow the instructions precisely experienced unexplained misfortune, mental deterioration, or sudden disappearance, a continuation of the curse that had plagued 19th century witnesses. In modern times, similar coded messages surface in digital formats. Emails, forums, and encrypted files appear seemingly at random, sometimes embedded in unrelated content. Researchers who attempt to decode them report striking parallels to historical phenomena, compulsions to repeat rituals, document events, or observe patterns in daily life, often accompanied by hallucinations and psychological distress. The correspondence acts as a bridge, allowing the second face to reach beyond mortality, crossing decades and mediums to engage with susceptible minds. Even those skeptical of the paranormal cannot ignore the consistency. Patterns, symbols, and consequences persist across centuries, geography, and technology. What these letters and codes reveal is a principle as unsettling as it is clear. Mordrake's presence is self-propagating. Curiosity, attention, and engagement act as conduits, allowing his influence to persist long after his physical death. The second face is no longer confined to flesh. It exists in the interactions it inspires, the obsessions it ignites, and the minds it ensnares. Edward Mordrake's correspondence, whether physical or digital, serves as a warning. Knowledge that transcends its time carries power and a price. The second face is patient, selective, and relentless, waiting for those who dare to read, decode, or engage. Every message, every symbol, every whisper is a thread in a network that binds the living to the legend, ensuring that some secrets remain dangerously alive. Edward Mordrake's second face has not remained confined to private journals or secret correspondence. It has seeped into the fabric of art, literature, theatre, and media, leaving an indelible mark on those who seek to represent or understand it. Across centuries, artists, playwrights, and writers report an uncanny compulsion to capture the dual visage in their work, often describing visions that appear unbidden, prompting sketches, paintings, or characters that eerily resemble Mordrake's second face. In some cases, these creations display a disturbing autonomy, as if the second face guides the hand, manipulates the narrative, or embeds hidden messages within the work itself. Theatre is particularly vulnerable. Accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries describe actors performing in productions inspired by Mordrake, who suddenly displayed altered behaviors, staring at empty spaces, whispering lines not written in the script, or exhibiting a duality of expression on stage, as though another consciousness had temporarily taken control. Directors and playwrights reported that rehearsals became exercises in unpredictability, where the creative process was both inspired and haunted by an unseen presence. Audiences, too, often sensed a subtle dissonance, a feeling of being watched by more than the performers themselves, reinforcing the legend of the dual-faced influence. Literature, film, and modern media have carried the phenomenon forward. Writers drawn to the Mordrake story frequently describe compulsions to draft endless passages, edit characters into perfect representations of the dual face, or leave cryptic annotations in margins that later seem to predict events in their lives. Digital media amplifies this effect, allowing images, videos, and references to propagate, each act of attention and engagement strengthening the psychological imprint of the second face. The result is a self-perpetuating cycle. Artists become conduits for the legend, audiences unwitting participants in its spread, and the second face thrives in the shared attention, as though feeding on human curiosity and creative obsession. These manifestations suggest a terrifying principle. The second face is not passive. It selects, influences, and directs, embedding itself in works of art and culture to continue its reach. Each creation, each portrayal, is both homage and conduit, linking creator, audience, and legend in a network of obsession, perception, and subtle manipulation. Edward Mordrake's influence, therefore, extends beyond biography or history. It is alive in every inspired depiction, waiting to claim those who look too closely, write too obsessively, or dream too vividly. Even in the 21st century, Edward Mordrake's dual presence refuses to remain buried in history. Reports continue to surface, from private correspondences, blogs, forums, and personal testimonies, describing encounters with the second face, each more unsettling than the last. Unlike historical accounts, modern experiences intersect with technology. Reflective screens, video calls, and digital images act as mirrors through which the second face asserts itself. Witnesses report seeing fleeting reflections, subtle distortions of facial features, or shadows moving contrary to logic. In every instance, the dual face seems aware, observing, judging, and sometimes communicating, often leaving a lingering sense of intrusion into one's thoughts and emotions. Psychologically, the effects mirror historical patterns. Those who claim contact describe obsessive preoccupation, fragmented sleep, and compulsive documentation of experiences. Dreams are frequently haunted by the second face, which appears in mirrors, darkened windows, or even the edges of peripheral vision. Subjects report hearing whispers or commands, sometimes urging them to recreate patterns, record symbols, or engage in ritualistic behavior. Mental health professionals consulted by some witnesses are often baffled, attributing symptoms to stress or neurological phenomena, yet the consistency across cases, locations, and mediums suggests an influence that transcends conventional understanding. Technology amplifies the second face's reach. Videos and images shared online frequently elicit compulsive engagement. Users stare too long, edit frames obsessively, or perceive movements within static images. Digital attention becomes a conduit, feeding the presence while deepening psychological vulnerability. The face adapts to modern mediums with the same precision it once exercised in private letters, mirrors, and theaters. Occult performances. Each interaction extends its influence further, ensnaring new observers and perpetuating the legend with a tangible, often disturbing, effect. Supernaturally, some claim direct interactions, fleeting touches, inexplicable movements of objects, or auditory phenomena resembling whispered speech. These encounters are often highly localized yet intensely personal, leaving participants irrevocably changed. Like those in the past, they emerge with an acute awareness that curiosity and attention are the price for witnessing the forbidden. Edward Mordrake's second face, it seems, does not sleep. It watches, adapts, and evolves, exploiting every new medium, every psychological vulnerability, and every cultural conduit to maintain its presence and perpetuate its reach. The lesson persists. The second face is alive in perception, technology, and human attention. It thrives wherever curiosity meets vulnerability, and those who encounter it are forever altered. A reminder that some secrets cannot be safely observed, only acknowledged, feared, and respected. Edward Mordrake's legacy is not a story that ends with death, records, or folklore. It is a presence that defies the constraints of time, geography, and reason. A force that persists in the minds, obsessions, and fears of those who dare to seek it. From the 19th century orphaned letters and secretive physicians' notes, through artistic renditions in theatre and literature, to modern digital interactions, the second face has proven itself adaptable, relentless, and infinitely patient. Its influence stretches across centuries, selecting, testing, and consuming minds with surgical precision, leaving behind traces of obsession, disappearance, or madness. The pattern is unmistakable. Those drawn to Mordrake's legend, whether by accident or intent, experience a compulsion to observe, document, and replicate. It is never passive. It manipulates perception, preys on curiosity, and transforms attention into power. Entire lifetimes can be consumed in service of this presence, and yet it asks for nothing tangible, only focus, vigilance, and the unwitting surrender of cognitive space. The second face does not operate through physical violence alone. Its dominion is psychological, technological, and cultural, leaving evidence only in obsessions, symbols, and inexplicable events. Even today, Mordrake's influence continues to manifest. Scholars, occultists, digital explorers, and artists unwittingly become conduits, their work and attention perpetuating a cycle first established in the dark corridors of 19th-century Virginia. Each book written, each image shared, each story told becomes a thread, connecting the living to the myth and the myth to the living. The second face thrives on engagement, feeding on human curiosity and ensuring that its legend does not merely survive, it evolves. This is the ultimate warning. Edward Mordrake's dual-faced presence is neither myth nor biography. It is a transmissible, persistent force capable of shaping perception, obsession, and behavior across generations. To seek it is to court alteration. To engage is to risk transformation. Some secrets are meant to remain unobserved. Some presences are meant to be feared. The second face is both mirror and predator, reflection and master. And those who encounter it find themselves forever entwined with a history that cannot be undone. Edward Mordrake did not die in obscurity. His legend endures, his second face watches, and the price of curiosity remains as high today as it ever was. Now, at the edge of this journey into Edward Mordrake's world, there is no sanctuary, no comforting conclusion. The dual-faced man is not a story confined to dusty archives or whispered folklore. He is a force, a presence that transcends time, space, and reason. And every mind that glimpses him becomes a participant in his legacy. The final truth is unsettling. Knowledge of Mordrake's existence carries a cost, and those who pursue it risk far more than curiosity. They risk their perception, their sanity, and, ultimately, the boundaries of their own self. The second face operates as a mirror, reflecting desires, fears, and obsessions with an intensity that cannot be ignored. It does not wait for the unwary, it seeks them. Every letter read, every image observed, every story shared strengthens its influence. It is patient, selective, and meticulous, a predator not of flesh, but of cognition. Those who believe themselves immune are often the first to be ensnared, for skepticism only sharpens the focus of the mind, creating fertile ground for obsession to grow. Consider the artists, the scholars, the curious souls who have encountered Mordrake across centuries. Some vanished, some were left broken, their minds haunted by visions and compulsions that cannot be rationalized. Others became vessels, conduits through which the second face perpetuates itself, embedding into culture, memory, and imagination. The pattern is clear. Engagement with the forbidden transforms the observer. The effect is not violent in the traditional sense. It is far more insidious, reshaping thought, perception, and identity. As you sit with this knowledge, the warning is yours to bear. Curiosity, once awakened, cannot be easily silenced. Attention is power, and in the presence of Mordrake, even passive observation is consent to the game. The second face is waiting, always patient, always observing, always ready to pull the unwary further into its labyrinth of psychological dominion. Remember this, the story of Edward Mordrake is not past tense. It is a living, evolving force that persists wherever eyes meet mirrors, screens, and shadows. To know of him is to be touched by him. To seek him is to risk being claimed by him. And when you close this account, take a moment to consider the reflection you see, for the second face may already be watching back,